The first thing he felt was pain in his left hand. Not a dull ache, nor a nagging one. It was sharp, as if someone had pressed a red-hot rod right into the skin between his thumb and index finger. He flinched and opened his eyes. In front of him stood a line of hundreds of men in linen shirts. They were all moving toward a wooden platform where a man in a red robe held a copper bowl. The sky was gray. The air smelled of sweat and cheap ale. Someone nudged him in the back and grumbled for him to hurry up. Cale Don looked at his hands, slender, veiny, with a horseshoe-shaped burn on his left palm. These weren't his hands. He's 27 years old. He's a geneticist from Boston. He remembers the truck. He remembers the crash. He remembers how the asphalt turned wet with his own blood. And now he's standing in line barefoot, wearing a wedding shirt 2 sizes too big. A blue box flashed before his eyes with text he shouldn't have been able to read, but he did. Status: Cale Don. Age 19. Health 41 out of 100. Iron deficiency. Chronic malnutrition. Second-degree injury to the left hand. Rod points, 0. Family tree, empty. A line was flashing below. Wife lottery, attendance mandatory. Refusal equals the gallows. He closed his eyes for 3 seconds. He opened them. The frame hadn't disappeared. The line hadn't disappeared. The burn hadn't disappeared. All right, let's figure this out. His body is young and hungry. He understands the local language, so he has a built-in translator. He's wearing wedding clothes, which means they're already leading him to the altar. He died after pushing a pregnant woman out of the path of oncoming traffic and woke up in a world where he's being forced to marry under threat of execution. The universe has good taste. The man in front of him in line turned around. Young, about 20, with a red face and trembling hands. He said he hoped to draw the merchant's daughter. He said his brother had drawn a weaver's widow last year and now lives in a stone house. He said the main thing was not to draw a black token. Cale asked what a black token meant. The guy looked at him as if he were crazy. He said that only one name is written on the black tokens: Ivrain Moray. He said there had been 9 grooms in 3 years, all dead. The first choked on his own blood on the first night. The second burned from the inside out. The third turned into a pillar of salt right on the wedding bed. The Church of Light calls her a vessel of the demon. The king keeps her alive for some reason that no one speaks of openly. This year, the 10th groom. If he dies, it's the stake. A public one, along with the entire neighborhood. The guy spat and said he'd rather be a widow with 3 kids than this creature in a black veil. Cale didn't say anything. He was looking at the platform. A man in a red robe was pulling tokens out of a bowl and calling out names. Each man stepped forward. He held out his hand. He took a bronze or copper disc. He read the name. He walked off to the right toward the line of women. Some smiled. Some turned pale. One fainted and was dragged away by his feet. A crowd of onlookers stood around the platform in a tight ring. Vendors were selling roasted chestnuts. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders. It was a celebration for everyone except those standing in line. Cale counted. 11 people remained ahead of him. Then 10. Then 5. The blue frame flashed again. Token selection. Option 1. Skip your turn. Cost 1,000 clan points. Option 2. Trust the system. You have 0 clan points. Draw. Cale smirked. There's no choice when your balance is 0. He stepped onto the platform. A man in a red robe grabbed his wrist and plunged his hand into the bowl. His fingers touched metal. Cold metal. All the tokens were warm from other people's hands. All except one. One lay at the very bottom and was ice cold. Cale already knew what he would draw. He pulled his hand out. A black token lay in his palm. The crowd gasped. Then they laughed. Then they fell silent. The man in the robe read the name aloud. Ivrain Moray. The captain of the guard standing at the edge of the platform slapped his knee and declared that this was the 12th groom in 3 years and that he would be buried in a mass grave because the treasury wouldn't allocate funds for a commoner's coffin. The soldiers around him cackled. Cale stood on the platform with a black token in his hand, looking in the direction the master of ceremonies was pointing. At the end of the line of brides, standing apart from the rest, was a figure in a white dress and a black veil. She didn't move. She didn't turn her head. She stood like a statue. There wasn't a single person within a 3-meter radius of her. Even the guards kept their distance. Cale stepped down from the platform. He walked past the brides in silk, past the brides in velvet, past the brides in pure linen. They all looked at him with pity. One crossed herself with the sign of the light. Another turned away. He stopped in front of the figure in the black veil. A blue frame flashed so brightly that he was blinded for a second. Genomic vision activated. A ribbon unfurled above Ivrain Moray's head. Not red, not gold. Silver. He hadn't seen one like it above anyone else in this crowd. The text on the ribbon read, "Blood of the goddess Selena. Status, dormant. Seal, 94%. Unlock via acceptance. Warning. The 9 previous holders of the spouse status have died. Fatal trigger, lust. Protection and care do not activate the protective mechanism." Cale read it twice, then a third time. Fatal trigger, lust. 9 men came to her as husbands and desired what husbands desire on their wedding night. The seal struck. 9 corpses. Not because she's a demon, because the seal strikes at will, not upon contact. The geneticist inside him awoke faster than the man. It's not a curse. It's a defense mechanism. Like an autoimmune reaction, the body attacks not an enemy, but a specific stimulus. Remove the stimulus and the patient lives. Ivrain raised her hand in a black glove. She held it out to him. Everyone was waiting. The captain of the guard was already placing bets, 10-1 on a corpse by dawn. The crowd fell silent. Cale looked at the outstretched hand. In any genetics textbook, the first step when working with hazardous material isn't analysis. It's contact. Safe contact. He dropped to one knee, took her hand, removed the glove. Her fingers were ice cold, slender, with ink stains on her fingertips. She read, a lot. He didn't kiss her hand. Instead, he turned her palm over and pressed it against the burn on his left arm. Skin to skin, scar to scar. He said 2 words. I was marked 2. We're even. Silence. Absolute. Even the chestnut vendors stopped shouting. Ivrain Moray froze. The seal didn't work. Nothing caught fire. No one turned to salt. No one choked on their own blood. He stood there on one knee, alive, holding her palm against his burn. A second. 2. 5. 10. The crowd began to whisper. The captain of the guard stopped laughing. Ivrain Moray did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She lifted her veil. Not all the way, by 2 centimeters, just enough to see his eyes. And he saw her. Pale skin, silver eyes, a split lip that she had bitten through herself from the tension. She whispered a single word. He did not repeat it to the crowd. The blue frame exploded with text. Acceptance of the cursed spouse confirmed. Ancestry system activated. Ivrain's blessing increased from 0 to 12. 500 ancestry points received. New ability, Reading the Seal, unlocked. Quest updated. Survive the wedding night. Reward, 1,000 ancestry points. Timer, 11 hours, 47 minutes. Cale stood up from his knee. He didn't let go of her hand. He turned to face the crowd. The captain of the guard looked at him with the expression of a man who had just lost a month's pay. Cale said to him calmly, "The mass grave can be canceled. He isn't going there anytime soon." The crowd fell silent. The man in the red robe wrote in the register with trembling hands, Cale Dawn, number 847, married, spouse, Ivrain Moray, status, alive. Cale Dawn woke up in his new body at the wife lottery and drew a black token bearing the name Ivrain Moray. Through genomic vision, he saw that her curse was not a demon, but the seal of the goddess Selena, triggered by lust. He pressed her palm against his burn instead of kissing her, and the seal did not activate, which earned him 500 clan points and the first level of trust from Ivrain. They were led to the bridal chambers on the third floor of the government building near the southern wall of the Capitol. The room was small. A bed. A table. A basin of water. A barred window. A bolt on the outside of the door. Not to protect the newlyweds, to keep the groom from running away. Cale heard 2 guards take up positions outside the door. One told the other he was betting 3 silver coins on a dead body by midnight. The second said he wouldn't bet because it wasn't interesting anymore. The 10th groom. The outcome was a foregone conclusion. Cale turned to Ivrain. She was standing by the far wall, her veil was lowered. Her hands were clasped in front of her. She didn't move. She wasn't breathing heavily, she was simply standing there, waiting. He realized what she was waiting for. She was waiting for him to approach. For him to reach out. For the seal to strike and for it all to end. For her, this was the 10th time. For her, it was routine. The blue frame displayed a timer, 11 hours and 22 minutes until dawn. The quest, survive the wedding night. Reward, 1,000 clan points. Failure condition, the death of one of the spouses. Cale sat down on the floor, not on the bed, but on the floor. He leaned his back against the wall opposite her, stretched out his legs, and stared at the ceiling. He told her he wasn't going to approach her. He said he wasn't going to touch her. He said he planned to sit on that floor until morning, and if she was cold, the blanket was on the bed, he'd manage without it. Ivran didn't reply. 20 minutes passed. Cale activated seal reading. The new feature displayed the structure in detail. Selena's seal. Blocking level, 94%. Type, protective. The mechanism reacts to certain emotional and physical stimuli from an officially recognized partner. First-level triggers. Sexual attraction, physical dominance, attempt at submission. Second-level triggers. None. Neutral interactions. Care, respect, distance. Domestic partnership. Status, safe. Cale read this as if it were a lab report. The mark wasn't a curse. The mark was a filter. It killed those who came as masters. It let through those who came as equals. 9 men in 3 years. Not a single one thought to simply sit on the floor and leave her alone. Cale thought about it and felt sick. Not because of the mark, because of the people. He opened his mouth and began to speak. Not about her, about himself. He said his name was Cale and that he was a blacksmith's apprentice from the village of Ashford. He said his parents had died of a fever when he was 14. He said the village had chipped in to pay for his journey to the capital because the token was mandatory and he had no money. He said the burn on his arm was from a forge that had collapsed 2 years ago. He spoke evenly and calmly, like a doctor reading a patient's chart aloud. He didn't expect a response. He didn't press her. He was simply filling the silence so she would know there was no enemy in the room. An hour passed. Ivrain sat down on the edge of the bed. She didn't lie down. She just sat there. Cale took this as progress and continued to remain silent. Another hour later, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, broken, like that of someone who hadn't used it in months. She said the first fiancé lasted 4 hours. She said he was a young soldier and that he was kind and that he'd brought her flowers. She said that when he leaned in to kiss her on the forehead, blood oozed from his lips, and a minute later he choked to death. She said the second one was older and rougher. He didn't wait. The brand burned him from the inside in 30 seconds. She said that after the 5th one, she stopped remembering their names. She said that after the 7th one, she stopped crying. She said that after the 9th one, she asked the executioner to file down her nails so she couldn't remove the veil herself, so she wouldn't have to see their faces as they died. Cale listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't say everything would be all right. When she fell silent, he said one thing. He said there was a well in his village. The water in it was clear, but poison ivy grew nearby. People blamed the well. They filled it with rocks. They dug a new one at the other end of the village. The water in the new well was murky, and the children got sick. Then an old man cut down the poison ivy. They went back to the first well. The water was still clear. The problem had never been the well. Yvraine was silent for a long time. Then she asked why he had told her this. Kale said that she was the well. She was silent even longer. Then she did something he hadn't expected. She took off her gloves, both of them. She placed them on the table, blue frame. Yvraine's blessing increased from 12 to 14. A trifle, 2 points. But Kale knew the value of small numbers. In genetics, a 1% difference in the genome is the difference between a human and a chimpanzee. 2 points of trust from a woman who hadn't taken off her gloves in 3 years is no trifle. It's a breakthrough. The night dragged on slowly. Kale didn't sleep. Yvraine didn't sleep. They sat in silence on opposite sides of the room, listening to the guards playing dice behind the door. Around 4 in the morning, Yvraine said he was the first one who hadn't tried. Kale replied that there was nothing to try. She wasn't a prize or a mission. She's a person, and she has ink on her fingers, which means she reads, and that makes her 100 times more interesting than any token in a bowl. Yvraine didn't reply, but he noticed that her shoulders dropped 0.5 centimeter. The tension eased. Not all of it, but some of it. Dawn broke with a gray light through the barred window. The timer on the blue frame hit 0. Quest completed. Survive the wedding night. Reward of 1,000 clan points awarded. Total, 1,500 clan points. New quest. Escort your spouse to your residence. Time limit, 48 hours. Reward, 200 clan points. The door bolt clanked. The door opened. A guard stood in the doorway. He looked at Kale, then at Yvraine, then back at Kale. His face went stiff. He took a step back and shouted down the stairs. "They're both alive!" Kale heard something fall downstairs. Probably someone had fainted or lost a big bet. He got up from the floor. His legs were stiff. His back ached. A 19-year-old body with an iron deficiency wasn't built for spending the night on a stone floor. He held out his hand to Yvraine. Not to grab her, he just held it out, palm up. She looked at his hand, at the burn, at his open palm. And for the first time in 3 years, she took someone else's hand of her own accord, without a glove. Her fingers were cold. His were warm. The seal was silent. They left the room. They walked past the guards, their jaws hanging open. They went down the stairs. They stepped out onto the street. The morning city smelled of bread and manure. Kale didn't know where to go. He had no home, no money. Nothing but 1,500 rod points on the blue screen and the woman beside him, who for the first time in 3 years was walking down the street without handcuffs. He asked her where she had lived before. She said in the locked-down quarter by the eastern wall, 14 Gray Ash Street. Kale asked if there was a roof there. She said yes. He said, "Then let's go home." Kale spent his wedding night sitting on the floor without touching Yvraine and received 1,000 rod points for completing the quest. He learned that the seal reacts only to lust and domination, while care and respect are safe. In the morning, they emerged alive and headed for Yvraine's house in the sealed quarter by the eastern wall. The house at 14 Sari Yassin Street was a 2-story ruin with a sagging roof and boarded-up windows on the first floor. The front door was hanging by a single hinge. Thistles grew waist-high in the yard. The fence on the west side was completely gone. Kale surveyed the house from the outside in 3 minutes and made a list. The roof is leaking in 2 places. The chimney is clogged. The left wall is covered in mold. The well in the yard is filled with trash. On the plus side, the walls are made of stone, not wood. The foundation is intact. The second floor is dry. There's a workshop in the annex. It's empty and dusty, but it has an anvil and a bellows. Kale looked at the anvil. Cast iron, heavy. Old, but still functional. The forge needed cleaning and new bellows, but the structure was sturdy. Someone in the Moray house had once worked with metal. He turned to Yvraine. She was standing in the doorway of the outbuilding, looking at the anvil. She said it had been her father's workshop. He made locks, not ordinary ones, but ones with mechanisms that no one could replicate. The church had declared him a sorcerer and burned him along with her mother when Ivrain was 14. Cale said nothing. He placed his palm on the anvil. The metal was cold and smooth. A good tool. He said he'd fix the roof first, then the chimney, then the well. Then he'd start working in the workshop. Ivrain asked why. Cale replied that you have to live somewhere and eat something, and for that you need money, and the only way he knows how to make money is with a hammer. For the first 2 days, he worked non-stop. He patched the roof with boards from a dismantled fence. He cleaned out the chimney with a long stick with a rag tied to the end. He cleaned out the well. The water turned out to be clean. Ivrain watched. She didn't help. She didn't get in the way. She sat on the second floor with a book in a dead language and occasionally came downstairs to check if he was still alive. On the second evening, she set a bowl of porridge in front of him, without saying a word. The porridge was too salty. Cale ate it all. The blue frame flashed. Ivrain's blessing increased from 14 to 15. On the third day, something happened that changed everything. Cale went to the market to buy nails. He had 12 copper coins that he'd found in a drawer in the workshop. The nails cost 10. He bought the nails and used the remaining 2 coins to buy a piece of bread. On his way home, he turned into an alley and saw a girl. A little girl, about 12 or 13 years old, with black hair and narrow eyes. She was sitting against a wall, eating something from a rag. No, she wasn't eating. She was choking. The bread was moldy. Cale stopped. The girl looked up. She saw him. She pressed herself against the wall. Her eyes were huge, frightened, like a little animal's. He activated genomic vision. A data strip unfolded above the girl's head. So-Yeon Park. Age approximately 13. Origin, Eastern Provinces. Status, refugee. Orphan. Parents died in a fire. Psychological trauma. Muteness. Physical vocal apparatus intact. Emotional block. And below, recessive talent. Voice of seal breaking. Status, dormant. Probability of awakening, 2% under current conditions. Cale read the last line 3 times. Voice of seal breaking. This girl, holding moldy bread in her hands, carried within her the ability that could break Selena's seal on Ivrain. A 2% probability under current conditions. Current conditions meant the street, hunger, and fear. The geneticist in him knew. Conditions determine expression. Change the environment, and the genes respond. He crouched down, slowly, without making any sudden movements. He held out his piece of bread to her. Fresh, mold-free. So-Yeon looked at the bread, then at him, then back at the bread. She didn't take it. Cale placed the bread on the ground in front of her. He stepped back 2 paces, sat down, waited. A minute passed. So-Yeon reached out, took the bread, took a bite, chewed quickly, choked. She was afraid they'd take it away. Cale didn't move. When she finished eating, he asked if she had a home. She didn't answer. He asked if she had any adults in her life. She didn't answer. He asked if she wanted to eat some more. She looked at him and nodded. Cale stood up. He held out his hand, not to grab her, palm up, just like with Ivrain. So-Yeon stared at his palm for 17 seconds. He was counting. Then she stood up and followed him, without taking his hand. But she followed. He took her home. Ivrain was standing in the kitchen. She saw the girl. She froze. So-Yeon saw Ivrain. And then something happened that Cale couldn't have foreseen. The girl wasn't afraid. Everyone in town was afraid of Ivrain. The guards, the neighbors, the merchants, everyone. So-Yeon looked at the woman in the black veil and calmly sat down at the table, as if the black veil and silver eyes were the most ordinary thing in the world. Ivrain looked at the girl, then at Cale, then back at the girl, and silently placed a bowl of porridge in front of her. The same over-salted porridge. So-Yeon ate it all. Kale sat down across from her. Blue frame, accepted into the clan. Soyeon Park. Status, adopted. The recessive talent Voice of Seal Breaking has been queued for awakening. Awakening cost, 800 clan points plus 1 day of the tree's owner's life. Current remaining days of life, 21,730 days, approximately 59 years. Soyeon's Blessing, starting value 15. Kale looked at the line about life days. Every awakening takes 1 day from him, not metaphorically, literally. He'll pay in years for every talent he awakens. It was fair. Nothing of value comes for free. He looked at Soyeon. She had finished her porridge and was drawing with her finger on the table. Invisible lines, letters he didn't recognize. Then she looked up at Yvrain and made a gesture with her hand. A simple one. She pointed at Yvrain, then at herself, then she pressed her palms together. Kale didn't understand. Yvrain did. She said quietly that the girl was saying they looked alike. Kale looked at them. Yvrain in a black veil with silver eyes, and the refugee girl with soot under her fingernails. They had nothing in common. But Soyeon saw what children see, not appearances, loneliness. That night, Soyeon fell asleep on the floor next to Yvrain's bed, curled up in a ball, like a puppy. Yvrain didn't sleep until dawn. She sat on the bed and watched the sleeping girl. Kale saw this from the hallway through the slightly ajar door. Blue frame. Yvrain's Blessing 15 upgraded to 16. He went down to the workshop, lit a candle, opened the system screen and began to count. 1,500 clan points. Awakening Soyeon's voice costs 800. That leaves 700. But there's no need to rush. Awakening only works when a person considers themselves part of the clan. Soyeon's Blessing is at 15. That's not enough. A minimum of 20 is needed for a stable awakening. You can't force it. The tree remains silent if there is doubt in the heart. So I must wait. Nurture. Not pressure. Not demand. Just be there. The geneticist in him knew. You can't speed up gene expression. You can only create the conditions. Warmth, food, safety, time. At dawn on the 4th day, there was a knock on the door of House 14. Loudly, demandingly. Kale opened the door. Standing on the threshold was a man in an expensive doublet with 3 armed servants behind him. A broad face, a red beard, small eyes, blue-rimmed glasses. Helmer Crossed. Baron. Landowner. He owns the plots adjacent to the neighborhood. The goal is to acquire the Morai estate through a process of burning and confiscation. The threat level is moderate. Helmer looked Kale up and down. He said he was surprised. He said that the 10th fiancé was still alive. He said it was amusing but didn't change anything. He said that, by law, the Morai family's land passes to the neighboring owner after the family's destruction. He said the Morai family was destroyed. Yvrain was the last of them. When the burning takes place, and it will, the land will pass to him, and the workshop, and the house, and the anvil. He said all this calmly, like a man who had come to claim what was already his. Kale stood in the doorway and looked at Baron Helmer Crossed. 3 armed servants behind him kept their hands on the hilts of their swords. The street was empty. The neighbors had shut their shutters. No one wanted to see what was about to happen to the cursed bride's 10th husband. Kale didn't move. He was calculating. The Baron has 3 men. Kale has none. The Baron has money and the law. Kale has an anvil and 1,500 rod points. A direct confrontation is out of the question, so he needs another move. He looked at the sword of the nearest servant. He activated genomic vision, not at the man, at the metal. The frame revealed the structure. Low-quality steel, 3 microcracks near the guard, 60% wear. A strong blow would snap the blade. Cale shifted his gaze to Helmer's own sword, an expensive one, a silver hilt. But there was a crack in the blade, a thin one, almost invisible, running from the tip to the middle of the blade. Cale told the Baron that his sword was cracked. Helmer fell silent mid-sentence. He looked at his blade. He drew it from its sheath. The crack was there, barely noticeable. Helmer flushed and asked how a commoner knew. Cale said he was a blacksmith. It's his trade. He can see the metal. Then he said something that made Helmer stop in his tracks. He said he could repair this sword, right now, for free. Helmer narrowed his eyes. He asked why. Cale said he wanted to showcase his work. If the Baron liked it, they'd have something to talk about. If not, the Baron would get his sword repaired and leave. Either way, the Baron would come out ahead. Helmer thought for about 10 seconds. Then he held out the sword. Cale took the blade and went into the workshop. He stoked the forge. The bellows weren't working well, but they were enough for a single blade. He placed the blade in the fire. He waited, pulled it out, struck it 3 times, precisely, evenly, right along the crack. Each blow filled the fissure. It wasn't just welding it shut, it was restructuring it. Cale didn't understand how he was doing it. His hands knew what his mind didn't. Cale Don's body had been a blacksmith's apprentice for 5 years. Muscle memory, the skills of the previous owner, plus his own understanding of structures. A geneticist sees chains, a blacksmith sees metal. Together, they saw every atom. He brought the sword out 20 minutes later. He held it out to Helmer, hilt first. The Baron took it. He examined it. The crack was gone. He ran his finger along the blade. He cut himself. He cursed. Blood dripped onto the ground. One of the servants picked up a fist-sized stone and handed it to the Baron. Helmer struck the stone with the sword. The blade cut through the stone like butter. The 2 halves fell into the dust. Helmer looked at the split stone, then at Cale, then back at the stone. He sheathed his sword. He said he didn't know how the blacksmith had done it. He said the conversation wasn't over. He said he'd be back, but right now he had business to attend to. He turned and left. The servants followed him. Cale stood in the doorway and watched them go. Blue frame, mission, buy time, complete, plus 300 clan points, total 1,800. Time bought, but only time. Helmer hasn't backed down. He'll be back. And next time he won't bring servants, he'll bring documents, or guards, or an inquisitor. Yvraine stood behind Cale. She'd seen everything through the workshop window. She said he was a fool. He'd repaired the weapon of a man who wanted to burn her at the stake. Cale replied that a repaired sword was a reason for conversation, not a fight. As long as Helmer was thinking about the sword, he wasn't thinking about the stake. Yvraine said nothing, but she didn't leave. She stood nearby. That too was progress. On the 5th day, Cale began working in the workshop. He repaired whatever the neighbors brought in. The first to arrive was an old man from the house across the street. He brought a broken lock. He said the lock hadn't opened in 3 months and he'd been climbing in through the window. Cale fixed it in an hour. The old man offered 4 copper coins. Cale took 2. The old man left, puzzled. The next day, 3 more people came. A knife, a door hinge, a pot with a hole in it. Cale fixed everything. He charged less than they asked for. He worked precisely and quickly. Within a week, people were coming to him every day. Donna's blacksmith's workshop. That's what they called it. Not the workshop of a cursed witch. A blacksmith's workshop. Blue frame. Neighborhood reputation plus 200. Plus 150 clan points. Total, 1,950. So Yun helped, in her own way. She didn't speak, but she carried water. She swept the workshop. She pumped the bellows when Cale nodded. Yvraine didn't leave the house. But twice a week, Cale found a mug of herbal tea on the anvil. Warm. She made sure he drank it. On the 8th day, So-yeon did something that made Kale freeze in the middle of his work. She was drawing, with charcoal on the workshop wall. He saw the drawing when he returned from the market. 3 figures, a tall one in a veil, a medium-sized one by the anvil, a small one with a broom. Beneath the drawing was a word, just one, drawn in uneven, childlike letters. Home. A blue frame. So-yeon's blessing 15 upgraded to 18. Kale stood before the drawing and felt his throat tighten. He wouldn't let himself feel that. Not here. Not now. He went back to work. On the 10th day, an order arrived that changed everything. A guard from City Hall brought 4 swords. The city guard needed them sharpened. They paid in silver. 1 silver coin for 4 blades. Kale worked all day. He sharpened all 4. The guard inspected them. He nodded. He placed the coin on the anvil. He left. The next day, another guard arrived, with 6 swords and 2 silver coins. 3 days later, Kale received a standing order from the barracks on the southern wall. 10 swords a week, 3 silver coins, a steady income. Blue frame, quest, provide for his family, completed, plus 400 clan points. Total, 2,350. Kale counted them every day. There were 18 days left until the Alliance review. In 18 days, he had to bring Ivrain to the Inquisitor and prove that she was pure, that Selena's mark wasn't a demon, that his wife wasn't a vessel of evil. He didn't yet know how to do it, but he had 2,350 clan points, the anvil, the workshop, the little girl drawing a house on the wall, and the woman who placed the warm potion on his workbench without saying a word. It wasn't much, but it was a start. On the 11th day, there was another knock at the door. Kale opened it, expecting to see a customer with a broken tool. A woman stood in the doorway, tall, broad-shouldered, with short red hair and the hands of a blacksmith. Only the fingers on her right hand were deformed. 3 out of 5 wouldn't bend. They stuck out straight, unbendable. She said she was looking for work. She said she knew how to forge. She said she'd been turned away from 14 workshops. She said her name was Marilyn Hayes. Kale activated genomic vision. The data stream above her head unfolded. Marilyn Hayes, 22 years old, widow, former master blacksmith. License revoked by the guild for a woman running a workshop. Physical injury to the right hand. 3 fingers are broken and have healed improperly. Cause, punishment from the Blacksmiths Guild. And below, a recessive talent, forging living metal. Status, dormant. Kale bought his way out of trouble with Baron Helmer by repairing his sword, which had begun to split stone. He opened a blacksmith's workshop and began receiving steady orders from the city guard. So-yeon painted the word home on the workshop wall. On the 11th day, the blacksmith's widow, Marilyn Hayes, appeared at the doorstep with broken fingers and the dormant talent, forging living metal. Kale looked at Marilyn Hayes's hand. 3 fingers on her right hand stuck out straight as wooden sticks, her index, middle, and ring fingers. The bones had fused at the wrong angle. She would never be able to make a full fist. She would never be able to hold a hammer properly. He asked who had done this. She said it was the Blacksmiths Guild. Her husband had died 4 years ago. She'd continued working in his workshop. The customers hadn't complained. Metal doesn't care who forges it. But the guild found out. According to the guild's bylaws, a woman cannot own a blacksmith shop. 4 of them came. They took away her license. They took away her tools. They took the anvil. And then the master blacksmith took a hammer and broke 3 of her fingers, one by one, so she'd remember. She told this in an even voice, without tears, without a tremor, like someone who had long since cried out all her grief and was now simply stating the facts. Kale listened. Genomic vision displayed a scroll above her head, and he saw a line she couldn't see. Forging of living metal. Status, dormant. Probability of awakening, 7% under current conditions. Cost of awakening, 600 blood points and 1 day of life. He didn't tell her about the talent. Not now. She hadn't come for a miracle. She'd come for work. Cale told her to come in. He led her into the workshop. So-yeon was sitting in the corner, drawing with charcoal on a piece of leather. Mary looked at the girl. She looked around the workshop, at the anvil, at the bellows. Cale saw her eyes change. She recognized everything. Every tool, every sound. The smell of charcoal and hot iron. This was her world. The world from which she'd been cast out. Cale didn't conduct an interview. He didn't ask what she could do. Instead, he picked up a hammer and handed it to her. Handle first. He said, "Show me how you take a blow." Mary looked at the hammer, at her hands, at her 3 stiff fingers. She took the hammer with the 3 intact fingers of her left hand and the 2 of her right. Awkwardly, uncomfortably, but firmly. She walked over to the anvil, raised the hammer, and struck. A ringing sound echoed through the entire workshop, clear, even, precise. 1 strike. But in that strike were 4 years of pain and 4 years of longing for metal. Cale saw it, not through the system, with his own eyes. Mary stood at the anvil, holding the hammer, and her shoulders were shaking. She wasn't crying, she stood straight, but her lips were pressed together so tightly they had turned white. Cale said he'd take her on. He said he had nothing to pay her with yet, but there was food and a roof over her head. He said work would start tomorrow. Mary turned to him. She asked why. Why was he taking on a cripple who'd been kicked out of everywhere? Cale replied that he'd seen her strike, and that she didn't need 3 fingers. She'd managed just fine with 2. Mary looked at him for 5 seconds. Then she nodded. She put the hammer back on the rack, exactly where it was supposed to hang. Out of habit, from memory, out of a blacksmith's instinct. Blue frame, accepted into the clan. Marilyn Hayes. Status, adopted sister of the clan. The recessive talent, forging living metal, has been queued for awakening. Marilyn's blessing, starting value, 5. Cale closed the frame. 5. Not 15 like So-yeon. Mary was an adult. Adults accept it more slowly. But 5 is already better than 0. She stayed. That same evening, 4 people sat at the table in House 14. Cale, Ivrin, So-yeon, and Mary. The porridge was still too salty. Mary finished her bowl and said it was the worst porridge she'd ever eaten in her life. Ivrin looked at her. Mary said she'd add some onions tomorrow if the hostess didn't mind. Ivrin didn't answer. But Cale noticed that the corner of her lip twitched. By a millimeter. A half smile. Her first in 3 years. Blue frame. Ivrin's blessing 16 upgraded to 17. Mary started working the next day. She couldn't handle small tools, but she could do everything else. She stoked the forge faster than Cale. She read the metal's temperature by its color without error. She knew which coal to use for which job. She knew when to strike and when to wait. She was a blacksmith to the core, and 3 broken fingers couldn't change that. After 2 days of working together, they completed a double order from the guard. 20 swords in 2 days. 6 silver coins. On the 3rd day, Mary did something that surprised even Cale. She took a fragment of an old blade from a pile of scrap metal, a fragment any blacksmith would have thrown away. She heated it and forged a knife from it. Not just any knife, a knife with perfect balance, with a handle wrapped in leather, with a blade that was thinner and sharper than anything Cale had seen in that workshop. She'd made it with 3 whole fingers on her left hand and 2 on her right. Cale took the knife. He turned it over in his hand, checked its balance. He placed the blade on a strand of hair and blew on it. The hair split in 2. He looked at Mary. She was standing by the anvil, staring at her hands, at her 3 unyielding fingers, at the knife she had just forged against all odds. Cale said the knife was worth at least 5 silver pieces. Mary said it was worth 10. Cale said, "Then let's sell it for 10. For the first time ever, Mary smiled. Not widely, just briefly, with one corner of her mouth. But it was a smile. Blue frame. Marilyn's blessing increased from 5 to 8. The days passed. 12 remained until the union review, then 10, then 8. Cale worked in his workshop and kept track of the time. He still didn't know how to get through the union review. Inquisitor Varain Ask was waiting for him with bonfires and witnesses. The Church of Light wanted a public burning. And Cale had no argument other than that Ivrain wasn't a demon. But try proving that to people who'd already ordered the firewood. On the 14th day, there was a knock at the door. Cale opened it. A woman was standing on the threshold, about 24 years old, in a dark dress, wearing glasses with round lenses, with a bag slung over her shoulder from which vials and rolled-up papers were sticking out. She said she had come from Inquisitor Varain. She said she had been sent to examine the condition of Ivrain Moray before the union review. She said her name was Celeste Marigold and that she was a physician. Cale activated genomic vision. The data stream above Celeste's head was unusual, long and detailed. Celeste Marigold, 24 years old, former court physician, expelled from the palace for refusing to carry out an order to poison a lady-in-waiting. Sent by Inquisitor Varain as an observer and likely a spy. Hidden motivation, personal guilt. Her sister died as a result of the poisoning that Celeste refused to carry out. Recessive talent, none. Artifact, glasses, lenses made of obsidian from Silent Mountain. Allow her to see curses and seals in the visible spectrum. Starting blessing value, -3. Cale looked at the number. -3. She wasn't just rejecting him, she was hostile. She had come as a spy and made no secret of it. Cale stepped aside and invited her in. Celeste entered. She surveyed the house with a quick, professional glance. She noted the cleanliness. She noted the order. She noted So-Yun in the corner holding a piece of coal. She noted Mary at the anvil in the workshop. She asked where Ivrain was. Cale said that Ivrain was on the second floor, but first he wanted to ask her for a favor. Celeste narrowed her eyes. Cale said that the girl in the corner was a refugee, that she hadn't spoken since she was 7, that she needed to be examined. He said that Ivrain could wait, the child couldn't. Celeste looked at him for 3 seconds, then 4. Then she turned to So-Yun. She crouched down. She took a small mirror out of her bag, a wooden tongue depressor, a candle. She examined So-Yun for 15 minutes, thoroughly, professionally, like a doctor, not a spy. So-Yun sat quietly. She didn't flinch. She looked at Celeste with curiosity, not fear. When Celeste finished, she stood up. She turned to Cale. She said that her throat was fine, her vocal cords were intact, the blockage was mental, not physical. Then she fell silent, and Cale saw her slowly take off her glasses, wipe them, put them back on. And she looked at him, not at So-Yun, at him. Cale understood. She had seen through her glasses. The obsidian lenses had revealed something to her, something she hadn't expected to see. She had seen the tree, or its trace, or the glow around So-Yun that had appeared after her initiation into the clan. Celeste said 4 words. "That can't be." Cale didn't answer. He didn't ask what couldn't be. He didn't try to explain. He just waited. Celeste stood in the middle of the room and looked at him through her obsidian glasses. Then she turned toward the stairs. She said she would now examine Ivrain. She went up to the second floor. She stayed there for 20 minutes. She came back down. Her face was pale. She said she would write a report to the Inquisitor. She said she would come back tomorrow. She left. Cale stood by the window and watched her walk down Gray Ash Street. She walked quickly, but at the corner she stopped. She turned around. She looked at number 14. Then she walked away. Blue frame, Celeste's blessing, -3, increased to 4. 7 points for 1 visit. She saw something that turned her worldview upside down. The glasses showed her the truth. That Ivrain isn't a demon. that the seal isn't a curse, that something is happening around this house and these people that shouldn't exist. Cale didn't know what she would write in her report. He didn't know if she would return as a spy or as a doctor. But he saw how she examined So-yeon. A doctor's hands don't lie. She touched the girl gently and precisely, with the skill of someone who heals, not maims. -3 turned into -4, not because Cale had convinced her, but because he'd shown her a child in need of help, and she couldn't walk away. There were 14 days left until the union review. Cale sat down at the table and began to think. He had 2,350 clan points. His wife bore the goddess's seal at 94%, a girl with a sleepy voice, a blacksmith with broken fingers, a doctor who is still a spy, and a house on a street called Grey Ash. In 14 days, Inquisitor Varain Ask will demand that he prove Ivrain is innocent. He has no evidence, no connections, no patrons, no plan. There is only an anvil and the people who have begun to call this place home. Mary started working in the workshop and forged a knife that cuts through hair. On the 14th day, the healer Celeste Marigold arrived, sent by the Inquisitor as a spy. Cale asked her to examine So-yeon instead of Ivrain, and through her obsidian glasses, Celeste saw something impossible around the tree. Her blessing jumped from -3 to 4, but there are still 14 days left until the Alliance Assembly, and Cale doesn't have a plan yet. Celeste returned the next day, without warning, without knocking. She just opened the door and walked in. She was holding a stack of papers tied with twine. She placed the papers on the table and said they were copies of the minutes from all 9 of Ivrain's previous hearings. Cale looked at the stack, then at Celeste. She said she'd stolen them from the Inquisitor's archives the night before. She said that if anyone found out, they'd cut off her hands. She said this in the same tone of voice one uses to talk about the weather. Cale asked why she'd done it. Celeste sat down in a chair. She took off her glasses, wiped them, put them back on. She said that yesterday, through her lenses, she saw something she hadn't seen in 10 years of practice. There was a glow around the girl So-yeon, warm, golden. That only happens to children whom someone has truly accepted. Not formally, not by law, truly. She said there was a different glow around Ivrain, silver, pure, without a single trace of demonic energy. The seal on her was ancient and powerful, but it was a protection, not a curse. Like armor, not like chains. She said that in 3 years and 9 Inquisition examinations, not a single healer had seen it, because not a single one had looked through obsidian lenses. Because obsidian lenses cost more than the Inquisition's annual budget. Because Celeste had inherited these glasses from her mother, who had received them from her own mother, who had been a court physician 100 years ago. And because every previous physician had looked at Ivrain with a preconceived diagnosis. Demon. Curse. Bonfire. No one looked to see, everyone looked to confirm. Cale picked up a stack of papers. He untied the string. He began to read. The language was archaic but understandable. The report of the first examination. Ivrain Moray, age 16. Diagnosis, Class 3 demonic possession. Basis, death of spouse on the wedding night. Recommendation, burning at the stake. Signed, Inquisitor Varain Ask. Minutes of the second examination. Same diagnosis, same result, same signature. Third, fourth, fifth, all identical, word for word. Cale looked up. He said these weren't examination reports. They were copies of the same document with the date changed. Varain hadn't examined Ivrain 9 times. He'd examined her once. And for the other 8, he'd simply copied the first report. Celeste nodded. She said she'd noticed it that night while reading. Even the ink was the same, from the same bottle. Cale stood up. He paced the room. He thought. If the reports are forged, then the diagnosis is invalid. If the diagnosis is invalid, then there's no grounds for the burning. If there's no grounds, then the Union Tribunal turns from an execution into a formality. But that only works if he can prove the forgery publicly, before the king, before the court, before the crowd. He asked Celeste if she could confirm the forgery as a professional physician. Celeste was silent for 10 seconds. Then she said she could, but they'd kill her for it. Not figuratively, literally. Varane does not forgive betrayal. Cale said he wouldn't ask her to testify unless he could guarantee her safety. Celeste looked at him for a long time. She said he was strange. She said anyone else would have already grabbed those papers and run to City Hall. Cale replied that without a living witness, the papers were just scrap paper, and he needed that witness alive, not dead. Celeste smiled. It was the first time she'd done that in front of him. Blue frame. Celeste's blessing 4 was upgraded to 7. She stayed for dinner. The porridge tasted different that evening. Mary added onions just as she'd promised, and there was less salt. Ivrane cooked in silence, but Cale could see that she was watching how much salt Mary was adding. She's learning. 5 people sat at the table. Cale, Ivrane, Soyun, Mary, and Celeste. Soyun was drawing with charcoal on a piece of leather and showing the drawings to Celeste. Celeste looked at the drawings and commented, "That's a house. That's a tree. That's a fire." Soyun nodded or shook her head. Mary asked Celeste what she saw through the glasses. Celeste answered with one word, "Light." Mary asked what kind. Celeste said, "Pure." Mary looked at Ivrane. Ivrane sat with her veil lowered and didn't move. Mary turned to Cale and said that if he was going to fight the Inquisitor, she needed a proper hammer, not that piece of junk. Cale said he'd buy her a hammer once he'd earned enough. Mary said she'd forge one herself if he gave her the right kind of iron. Cale said the right kind of iron cost 20 silver pieces. Mary said she knew. She fell silent. She ate her porridge. Blue frame. Marilyn's blessing 8 upgraded to 9. For the next 5 days, Cale worked according to plan. In the morning, he forged swords for the guards. In the afternoon, he repaired household tools for the neighbors. In the evening, he studied Varane's protocols and looked for weaknesses. Celeste came every day. Technically, she was still writing a report for the Inquisitor. In reality, she was treating Soyun. She brought herbal tinctures for her throat. She gave her warming treatments. She spoke to her in a soft, even voice. She didn't demand answers, she simply talked. About flowers, about birds, about how the throat is structured on the inside. Soyun listened and drew. On the 6th day of treatment, Soyun made a sound. Not a word, a sound. Quiet, like exhaling through pursed lips. Celeste froze. Soyun was startled by her own voice and covered her mouth with her palms. Celeste gently moved her hands away and said it was good, that the throat remembers, that you just need to give it time. Blue frame, Soyun's blessing. 18 has been raised to 19. Cale saw this from the workshop through the open door. One more point until 20. At 20, according to the system's forecast, Soyun will make a real sound for the first time. A vocal sound, a conscious one, not a reflex, but a decision. He went back to work. He heated the blank. He struck it. Again and again. Every strike is money. Every coin is food. Every bowl is a step toward making this house a home, not just in Soyun's drawing. There were 8 days left until the review. Cale laid out everything he had in front of him. Varane's reports. Forged. Proven to be forged. A witness, Celeste. Ready to confirm, but fears for her life. The glasses. They reveal the truth, but the glasses are an artifact. The court won't accept testimony from an artifact without confirmation from a second independent source. A second source. His system. Genomic vision. But he can't show the blue frame to others. It's visible only to him. So another move is needed. Cale thought for 3 days. And on the 3rd day, he found the answer. Not in the protocols, not in the system, in Varane himself. The Inquisitor claims to see a black demonic aura on Ivrane. He stated this at each of the 9 examinations. He built his accusation on this. But if the records are forged, then he never conducted a real examination. That means he never saw the aura. That means his statement is a lie. And if Kale asks him to prove his words publicly before the court, Varain will be trapped. He'll be afraid to touch Yvraine because he's heard about the 9 corpses. Refusing to touch her would mean admitting that he's afraid. And an inquisitor who's afraid of his own defendant isn't an inquisitor. He's a clown. Kale smiled. For the first time in 14 days. This wasn't a plan. It was a trap. And Varain had driven himself into it with those 9 forged records. The day of the Union Review began with rain. Light rain. Cold rain. Kale stood by the window and watched the water run down the glass. Behind him, Yvraine was getting dressed. A black dress, a black veil, black gloves. She was preparing for death as if it were a ritual. Slowly, carefully, every fold in place. Kale turned to her. He said she wouldn't die today. Yvraine replied that each of the 9 had said the same thing. Kale said that none of the 9 had read Varain's protocols. Yvraine looked at him from under her veil. She said nothing. They left the house. Mary was waiting at the door with a hammer at her waist. Celeste stood a little further away with a bag over her shoulder. So-Yan sat on the step and watched the rain. Kale told So-Yan to stay home. So-Yan shook her head. She stood up. She followed them. Kale didn't argue. The 5 of them walked through the streets of the capital. The nameless blacksmith, the cursed bride, the widow with 3 broken fingers, the exiled healer, the mute girl. Passers-by turned to look. They whispered. They made way for them, not out of respect, out of fear. Yvraine's black veil worked better than any weapon. The throne room of the royal palace was packed. Hundreds of couples had arrived for the ceremony. Husbands in their finest clothes, wives in their cleanest. Clergymen in white robes stood along the walls. King Hadrian IV sat on a dais against the far wall. A man in his 50s, graying temples, cold eyes, slender fingers resting on the throne's armrests. He watched those entering with an expression of boredom. Standing next to the throne was Inquisitor Varain Ask. Tall, thin, he wore a white robe with the golden symbol of the Church of Light on his chest. His face was like that of a hawk, narrow, sharp, with eyes that never blinked. Kale activated genomic vision. The band above Varain was dark red. Varain Ask, 43 years old, Inquisitor of the Church of Light, affiliated with the Order of the Pure Flame. Rank, Pawn. Motivation, career and fear of the Order's leadership. Classified information, follows the orders of Archbishop Talmor. No recessive talents. Kale shifted his gaze to the king. The sash above Hadrian was strange. Double, one gold, the other black. Like 2 layers, one on top of the other. The text read, Hadrian IV, age 52, king of Astarina, knows the true nature of Selena's seal, is keeping Yvraine alive for personal purposes. A second seal is hidden beneath the throne room, intends to use the method of breaking the seal if it is found. Maximum threat level. Kale closed the scroll. Not now. One enemy at a time. Varain first. The inspection began with formalities. Each couple approached the Inquisitor. Varain touched his wife's forehead with his right hand. He declared them pure. The couple bowed to the king and left. An assembly line. 40 couples. 50. 100. Varain worked mechanically. A touch. Pure. Next. Kale was counting. They were the last ones. Number 847. When the penultimate couple left, Varain straightened up. He looked at Kale. He looked at Yvraine, and he smiled. He spoke loudly so the whole hall could hear. Number 847. Kale Dawn and Yvraine Moray, a third-class demon vessel. The hall, which had already begun to disperse, fell silent. People turned around. They listened. Varain continued. He said that Ivrain Moray had undergone the examination 3 times and had been declared possessed 3 times. He said that 9 husbands had died from her touch. He said that, according to the law of the Church of Light, the 10th instance was definitive confirmation and that it called for burning at the stake. The hall was silent. The king sat on his throne and watched. He did not intervene. He waited. Cale stood before Varain and could feel his heart beating. Pulse 110, breathing steady. His hands weren't shaking. He could handle this. Cale spoke. His voice was steady, calm. He said he respected the Inquisitor. He said that the Church of Light does important work. He said he was a simple blacksmith and didn't know the intricacies of ecclesiastical law. Then he said, but. He said that if the Inquisitor claimed to see a black demonic aura around Ivrain, then he had a simple request. Let the Inquisitor touch it, right now, in front of the entire courtyard. If the aura is demonic, then the touch of a holy man should cause a reaction. Pain, a scream, smoke, something. If the Inquisitor is right, then he is in no danger. The light protects its servants. The hall fell silent. Everyone was looking at Varain. Varain stood motionless. His expression didn't change. But Cale saw it. The Inquisitor's fingers twitched. By a millimeter. He was afraid. He'd heard about the 9 corpses. He didn't know how the seal worked. He thought the touch would kill him just as it had killed the others. Varain said that was inappropriate, that the procedure did not require physical contact with the possessed, that the diagnosis was made based on documentation, not by touch. Cale nodded. He said he understood. Then he said that if the Inquisitor was making a diagnosis based on documentation, he would like to see that documentation. Varain said that the records were kept in the archives and were accessible only to the church. Cale pulled a stack of papers tied with twine from his belt. He placed it on the table in front of the throne. He said, "Here are the records, all 9 of them, and that any literate person in this room could see that all 9 were written in the same ink, in the same handwriting, with identical wording, word for word. Because these aren't 9 inspections. This is 1 inspection copied 9 times. The room grew noisy. Varain turned pale. The king on the throne leaned forward 3 centimeters. Varain spoke quickly. He said they were forgeries, that the documents had been stolen, that the blacksmith had committed a crime by breaking into the church's archives. Cale didn't flinch. He said he hadn't broken into the archives. He turned to Celeste. Celeste was standing 10 paces away from him, glasses on her nose, a bag over her shoulder, pale but upright. She stepped forward. She stated her name, her title, former court physician. She said she had examined Ivrain Moray personally through obsidian lenses and detected no demonic energy. She said the seal on Ivrain was an ancient protective construct, not a curse. She said the Inquisitor's records showed signs of forgery. The hall buzzed with commotion. Varain lost his composure. He raised his voice. He said that an exiled poisoner had no right to testify. He said that obsidian lenses were superstition. He said that Cale Don had bribed her or bewitched her. Cale had been waiting for this moment. He turned to the king. He bowed and spoke a single sentence. He said that if the Inquisitor refused to touch his wife, and if the records were identical, and if the only independent physician in the room said there was no demon, then he asked the king to render a verdict. Guilty or not. Right here, right now. The hall fell silent. Everyone looked at Hadrian. The king sat on his throne and looked at Cale for a long time. Then at Ivrain. Then back at Cale. Cale could see through genomic vision that the double band above the king was pulsing, gold and black. He was counting. He was deciding. The king clapped his hands once. The sound echoed off the walls. He announced that the couple, Cale Don and Ivrain Moray, were provisionally cleared pending further evidence. He announced that Inquisitor Varain Askew was ordered to conduct a re-examination with the assistance of 2 independent physicians within 3 months. He announced that the burning at the stake was postponed until the re-examination. The hall erupted in a murmur. Varaine stood as white as a wall. Kale stood calmly, blue frame. Quest, passed the union examination, completed, plus 2,000 clan points. New feature, altar of union unlocked. Royal recognition received. Total clan points, 4,350. Then the frame displayed another line. New quest, the mother's trial. Duration, 90 days. Condition, the spouse must be pregnant or present an heir. Failure, annulment of the marriage and burning at the stake. Kale read this and looked at Ivraine. She stood nearby with her veil lowered. She couldn't see the blue frame, but she heard the king's words. Conditionally purified, not pure. Conditionally. They were the last to leave the throne room. At the exit, Kale was caught up by a voice. Quiet, so that only the two of them could hear. The king stood by the side door, alone, without guards. He said 4 words. Now you work for me, blacksmith. Kale stopped. He looked at the king. Hadrian was smiling, subtly, like a man who had just won a game that others hadn't even seen. Kale didn't reply. He bowed. He left. Outside, the rain had stopped. Mary was waiting at the palace gates with a hammer slung over her shoulder. So-Yan was sitting on a step. Celeste stood off to the side, trembling. The adrenaline was wearing off. Kale looked at them, at his family. 4 people, 1 widow, 1 mute, 1 outcast, 1 cursed, and him. A blacksmith from Boston in the body of an orphan from Ashford. They walked home along the wet streets in silence. At 14, Mary spoke first. She said Kale was crazy. She said he could have died. She said that if the king had decided otherwise, they would all have been burned at the same stake. Kale said he knew. Mary punched him in the shoulder. It hurt. With her left hand. Her good one. Then she said that if he did that again, she'd kill him before any inquisitor could. Kale said he'd remember. Blue frame. Maryland's Blessing 9 has been increased to 12. At the Alliance Assembly, Kale publicly exposed Inquisitor Varaine's forged records and demanded that he touch Ivraine. Varaine refused. Celesta confirmed via her obsidian goggles that there was no demonic energy present. The king declared the couple conditionally purified, but scheduled the mother's trial in 90 days. On the way out, Hadrian whispered to Kale that he was now working for him. The first few days after the hearing passed in silence. No one came, not the guards, not the neighbors, not the customers. Kale waited. The silence following a public scandal is not peace, it is a pause. People were deciding whose side to take. On the 3rd day, the first customer arrived. Not a neighbor, a merchant from the central market. He'd heard about the blacksmith who'd repaired the baron's sword so that it could cut through stone. He brought 4 knives and asked to have them sharpened. He paid 3 times the usual price. Kale took the money and sharpened the knives. On the 4th day, 2 more came. On the 5th day, 4 more. A week after the review, people came to the workshop every day. Rumors were spreading. Blacksmith Don, who had survived the cursed bride. Blacksmith Don, who had humiliated the Inquisitor before the king. Blacksmith Don, whose blades cut through stone. The last part was an exaggeration. Only Halmer's sword could cut stone, and that was because Kale could see the metal's structure through genomic vision. The sharpening itself was simply well done. But people prefer legends to facts. Kale didn't argue. Money was pouring in. Silver was turning into food, tools, and materials. Mary worked beside him. They divided up the orders. Kale took on swords and knives. Mary handled household tools, hinges, locks, and staples. She worked more slowly because of her fingers, but with greater precision than any able-bodied blacksmith Kale had seen in this city. The blue bar showed her progress. Her clan points were rising. 4,500, 4,800, 5,200. Each order brought small bonuses, plus 10 for working with a clan member, plus 20 for a stable income, plus 50 for improving living conditions. The system valued care, not feats of valor. Kale finally repaired the roof. He replaced the door. He installed glass in the first-floor windows. He bought a second blanket, a third, a fourth, one for each of them. On the 20th day after the review, So-yeon spoke, not with words, with a sound. She was sitting in the kitchen with Ivrian. Ivrian was reading aloud from a book in a dead language. She did this every evening. Not for So-yeon, for herself. But So-yeon listened. She always listened. That evening, Ivrain finished the page and fell silent. So-yeon looked at her. She opened her mouth and sang a single note. Not a word, a note. Pure, high, ringing like crystal. Ivrain dropped the book. Mary ran out of the studio. Celeste, who had been sitting in the corner with her notes, looked up. Kale stood in the doorway. So-yeon sat at the table, her eyes wide with horror. She was frightened by her own voice, like a child who had forgotten how to walk and took her first step. Ivrain slowly picked up the book from the floor. She placed it on the table. And she did something she had never done before. She reached out and stroked So-yeon's head, without a glove, her bare palm on the girl's black hair. So-yeon didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. She closed her eyes and rested her head under the palm, like a cat. Blue frame. 19 increased to 22. Ivrain's 17 increased to 20. Kale stared at the two numbers. Ivrain is at 20. 20 is the threshold. At 20, according to the system's description, she will reveal her childhood name, a name no one knows. He didn't wait. He didn't ask. If she wants to, she'll say it. If not, then not. 20 isn't a right to demand. 20 is the right to hope. That night, Kale didn't sleep. He sat in the workshop and stared at the system screen. The Altar of Convergence. New feature. Description. Allows for the awakening of recessive talents in clan members. Cost varies. Prerequisite. The bearer's blessing must be at least 20. So-yeon scored 22. She's ready for awakening. Cost. 800 clan points and 1 day of life. Kale has 5,200 clan points and 21,730 days of life. -1 is 21,729, he thought. Awaken her now or wait. The voice of seal breaking could have removed the seal from Ivrain. But So-yeon was 13 years old. She had just uttered her first sound in 6 years. Forcing awakening in a child who had only just begun to emerge from her shell was a risk, not a medical one, but a psychological one. The geneticist within him knew this. Gene expression without the body's readiness isn't awakening, it's trauma. He closed the altar. Not now. So-yeon would be ready when she was ready, not when it was convenient for him. He looked at the line showing her days of life. 21,730. 59 years and 7 months. Each awakening subtracts a day. If he awakens 50 people, he'll lose 50 days. If 100, then 100. If 1,000, he stopped himself. Don't count people as a resource. That's the thought you have to run away from. He stood up, left the workshop, went up to the second floor. The door to Ivrain's room was ajar. He peeked inside. So-yeon was sleeping on the floor next to the bed. Ivrain was sitting on the bed, looking out the window. Without her veil, her silver eyes reflected the moonlight. She turned around. She saw him. She didn't put on her veil. Kale stood in the doorway and waited. Ivrain was silent. Then she spoke, quietly, almost a whisper. She said her name used to be Rin, when she was a child. Her mother called her Rin. Kale nodded. He said, "Good night, Rin." Ivrain. Rin. She turned back toward the window, but he could see in the moonlight that her cheeks were wet. Blue frame. Ivrain's blessing increased from 20 to 22. Kale closed the door and went downstairs. He sat down on the floor in the workshop. He leaned against the anvil. He closed his eyes. Universe. I don't know why you dragged me here, but if it was because of them, then thank you." On the 35th day, Leah came to the house. Or rather, she didn't just come, she barged in. Cale returned from the market and found the workshop window open. Inside, a girl of about 12 was sitting at the workbench, eating a pie. His pie, the one he'd bought for So-Yun. The girl was small, thin, with short, dirty hair and a scrape on her cheekbone. Her clothes were patched, her feet were bare, her eyes were defiant. She saw Cale and didn't run away. She wasn't scared. She took another bite of the pie and stared him straight in the eye, as if he were the one who had barged in on her, not the other way around. Cale activated genomic vision. The ribbon above the girl's head unfurled, and he stopped. Leah Pepper, age approximately 12, origin unknown, orphan, pickpocket in the Docks District, no permanent residence. Crimes, petty theft, 6 arrests, 6 escapes. And below that, lineage, House Pepper, the third of the 3 sleeping houses. Status, last heiress. Recessive talent hidden until accepted into the house. Cale read the line about House Pepper twice. The 3 sleeping houses. He already knew about the first one, Moray, the House of Ivrain, the clan whose blood bore Selena's mark. Now the second clan stood before him, or rather, sat at his workbench and chewed on his pie. He didn't show that he'd seen it, didn't flinch. His expression didn't change. He looked at the girl. She looked at him. She was waiting for the blow. He could tell by the way she braced herself, the way she pressed her elbows to her sides, the way she tensed her legs, ready to leap toward the window. 6 arrests and 6 escapes. She knew what to do when she was hit. Cale walked past her to the shelf. He took the second pie. He set it on the workbench next to her. He said that if she was hungry, she should come through the door instead of the window. The girl froze. She looked at the second pie, then at him, then at the pie again. She didn't take it. She said she didn't need pity. Her voice was hoarse, defiant. The voice of a child who was used to snapping back to survive. Cale said it wasn't pity, it was dinner. And if she wanted to eat, the table was in the kitchen, not on the workbench. Leah jumped down from the workbench. She took both pies. She pressed them to her chest. Cale led her into the house. Ivrain was standing in the hallway. So-Yun was peeking out from behind her back. Mary came out of the workshop with a hammer slung over her shoulder. Leah looked at the 4 adults and the 1 little girl. She clutched the pies tighter. She said she wouldn't stay. She said she'd just eat and leave. Cale said that was fine. He said no one was keeping her there. He set a plate of porridge in front of her. Leah ate so fast she choked. Then she finished both pies. Then she drank 2 glasses of water. Then she looked at Cale and asked if there was any more. Cale placed a second bowl of porridge in front of her. She ate that one too. So-Yun sat across from her, drawing. She drew Leah. With quick strokes. Exactly. Leah with a pie in her hand and a defiant look in her eyes. So-Yun handed the drawing across the table. Leah took it. She looked at it. For the first time all evening, her expression changed. The defiance was gone. Only surprise remained. She asked, "Is that me?" So-Yun nodded. Leah tucked the drawing into her bosom, quickly, as if it too could be taken away. She left that evening. Cale didn't stop her, didn't try to talk her out of it. She came back the next day, climbed in through the window. Cale said the door was open. She said she was more used to coming in through the window. She ate, left, came back, 3 days in a row. On the 4th day, she came in with a broken nose. Blood was running down her chin. Her left eye was starting to swell shut. Cale didn't ask who had done it. Celeste, who was in the house at the time, silently tended to the wound. She rinsed it out. She applied a cold compress. Leah sat quietly. She didn't flinch. She was used to it. When Celeste finished, Leah looked at her and said thank you. It was the first time in 4 days she'd spoken that word. Celeste nodded. She adjusted her glasses. She didn't say anything. That night, Leah didn't leave. She fell asleep on the workshop floor, curled up in a ball by the anvil. Cale found her in the morning. He brought a blanket. He covered her with it. He didn't wake her. When she woke up, she saw the blanket and sat there motionless for a long time. Then she stood up. She folded the blanket. She placed it on the workbench. She went into the kitchen. Cale was sitting at the table. She sat down across from him. She was silent. Then she said she wanted to stay. Cale said she could stay as long as she wanted. Leah said no. She wanted to stay for good. She looked at him and said a word Cale hadn't expected. She said, "Dad." She said it with a smirk, defiantly, as if she were tasting it, as if she were testing him, as if she were waiting for him to laugh or brush it off. Cale looked at the 12-year-old pickpocket with a black eye and scrapes on her arms who had just called him Dad as a joke to protect herself from the possibility that it might turn out to be true. He said, "Yes, sweetheart," without a smile, without a joke, seriously. Leah froze. Her lips trembled. She quickly turned away, wiped her face with her sleeve, turned back. Her eyes were red. Her nose was wet. She said his porridge was too salty. Cale said he knew. Blue frame. Accepted into the clan. Leah Dawn. Status: adopted daughter. Airline open. Second ancient line detected. Pepper clan. Recessive talent hidden until blessing reaches 50. Leah's blessing starting value, 20. Days of life remaining, 21,729. Cale stared at the number 20. Kids take it in stride. One day, one word. Dad. And 20 trust points that an adult would need months to earn. Then he saw a line that made him hold his breath. Family tree updated. The Dawn lineage. Active lines. Moray through marriage. Pepper through adoption. 2 out of 3. 2 ancient lines out of 3 united under a single surname. By chance? No, not by chance. The black token wasn't a coincidence. So Yun on the street wasn't a coincidence. Leah at the workshop window wasn't a coincidence. The family tree was gathering his kin. Piece by piece. Piece by piece. Through the children the world had cast aside. Cale closed the frame. He looked toward the kitchen. Leah was arguing with Mary over who would wash the dishes. So Yun was drawing a new picture. Now there were 4 figures in it, a 5th small one holding a pie. Yvraine stood by the stove, stirring porridge. No gloves, no veil. Silver eyes, ink-stained fingers. She was cooking for 5 people, and for the first time, she hadn't oversalted it. On the 35th day, the pickpocket Leah Pepper barged into the workshop for a pie. After 4 days of visits, she stayed for good and called Cale Dad. The system revealed that Leah was the last heir to the Pepper house, and now the Dawn family united 2 of the 3 ancient lines. For the first time, Yvraine took off her veil and gloves in front of everyone and cooked porridge without oversalting it. On the 50th day, Baron Halmer Krost returned, but he wasn't alone. 8 guards from the city garrison came with him, not his personal servants, but a real guard bearing an order with the magistrate's seal. Halmer stood behind them, smiling. He said he had filed a complaint with the magistrate for illegal residence in the home of a convicted family, for operating a shelter without a license, for running a blacksmith shop without a guild permit. 3 charges. Each one on its own carries a fine. All 3 together mean eviction and confiscation. Cale stood in the doorway and did the math. 8 guards, armed, documents with a seal. By law, he was required to let them in for an inspection. Refusal meant resisting authority. Resistance meant prison. Prison meant the end. He let them in. The guards entered the house. They searched the rooms. They recorded the names of the residents. Cale Dawn. Yvraine Moray Dawn. Soyeon Park. Marilyn Hayes. Leah Dawn. The senior guard asked on what grounds 3 of the 5 were not blood relatives. Cale pulled a piece of paper from his belt. A marriage certificate issued in Jerebiovka. Soyeon's adoption certificate, certified by the parish clerk 3 weeks ago. Leah's adoption certificate, certified by the same clerk 5 days ago. Marilyn. Cale said she was a workshop employee and was residing there under an employment contract. The senior officer checked the papers. He nodded. Clear on the first charge. Second charge, operating an unlicensed shelter. The guard said that if minors who are not blood relatives live in the house, by law it is considered a shelter and requires a license from the magistrate. Cale said it wasn't a shelter. It was a family. So-Yan and Leah were his daughters according to the documents. The guard looked at the papers. He looked at So-Yan. He looked at Leah. He nodded. Clear on the second charge. Third charge, blacksmithing without a guild permit. The guard asked if Cale had a license from the Blacksmiths Guild. Cale didn't. He didn't have a license. He'd been working without one from day one. He knew it was a problem. He knew it and kept putting it off. Helmer knew it too. That was exactly why he was smiling. The guard said that without a license, the workshop was subject to closure. The tools would be confiscated. The owner would be fined 30 silver coins. 30 silver coins. Cale had 22. Mary stood by the anvil. Cale saw her strong fingers turn white on the hammer's handle. She looked at the guards, at the people who had come to take away the workshop, for the second time in her life. The guild had taken the first one. Now they would take the second. Through genomic vision, Cale saw the ribbon above Mary pulsing. Forging of living metal. A dormant talent. Probability of awakening. The number had changed. It had been 7%. Now it was 34. Stress, pressure, the threat of losing what had become her home. The body reacts to its environment. Genes respond to stress. Sometimes expression arises not from peace, but from necessity. Mary raised her hammer. Not at the guards. She walked over to the anvil. She took a piece of iron from the rack, an ordinary scrap. She placed it in the forge. The guards watched. Helmer watched. Cale watched. Mary pulled the red-hot iron out with tongs. She placed it on the anvil. She raised the hammer and struck. The first blow was ordinary, the second too, the third, the clang of metal, sparks, nothing special. The fourth blow was different. The sound changed. From a dry thud, it turned into a rumble, low, deep, as if the anvil had begun to sing. Mary struck a fifth time. The iron beneath the hammer changed shape, not the way ordinary iron changes. It flowed, smoothly, as if alive, as if the metal itself were deciding what form to take. Mary struck a sixth time, a seventh, an eighth. With every blow, the iron changed. It twisted, it stretched, it took shape. Without a template, without a mold, without a plan, the metal obeyed her hands. Her 3 broken fingers wouldn't bend. The metal bent in their place. 2 minutes later, an object lay on the anvil, a flower, an iron rose, with petals as thin as paper, with thorns on the stem, with a drop on one petal, a drop that looked like dew but was metal. The guards were silent. Helmer was silent. Cale was silent. Blue frame, talent awakening, Marilyn Hayes, forging living metal, status, active, cost 0 blood points, 0 days of life. Spontaneous awakening, condition met, stress plus attachment plus protection of one's own. Cale read the line twice. Spontaneous awakening, 0 cost. She had awakened herself, without the altar, without his intervention, because someone had come to take her home, and her body responded in the only way it knew how, to forge. Mary stood by the anvil, looking at the iron rose, at her hands, at the 3 unyielding fingers that had just accomplished the impossible. She wasn't crying. She wasn't laughing. She stood there, breathing, heavily, as if after a run. The senior guard approached the anvil. He looked at the rose, reached out his hand, touched a petal. The petal rang like a bell, a thin, clear sound. The guard pulled his hand back. He looked at Cale. He said that, according to the law, a master blacksmith possessing a unique skill could obtain a personal license from the crown, bypassing the guild. Paragraph 12 of the Craftsman's Code. Cale nodded. The guard said he would submit a recommendation to the magistrate. He said it would take 3 days to review. Until a response is received, the workshop would operate as usual. He turned to Helmer. He said the third charge had been dropped pending further investigation. 2 out of 3 have been dropped entirely. There are no grounds for confiscation. Helmer stood as red as a beetroot. He looked at the Iron Rose, at Mary, at Cale. He turned and walked out without saying a word. The guards followed him. The door closed. Silence. Mary stood by the anvil, a hammer in her hand. 3 unyielding fingers and the Iron Rose on the anvil. She turned to Cale. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. She said she didn't know how she'd done it. Cale said he knew. She told him how. Cale said she'd been defending her home, and her hands responded. Mary looked at the hammer, at the anvil, at the rose, then at Cale. She said one word. My blacksmith. A blue frame. Marilyn's blessing. 12 increased to 18. A new line. Talent, forging living metal. Level 1. Capabilities, shaping metal without a template. Restriction, small items only. Maximum weight, 500 grams. Work time, no more than 10 minutes at a time. Cale read the specifications. Level 1, small items. But this was a start. The Iron Rose on the anvil weighed 200 grams. The petals were as thick as a fingernail, and each one jingled. A single flower like that would fetch 10 silver pieces at the market. 2 such flowers a week, and they'd never go hungry. 5, and they'd buy a license without any strings attached. 10, and the baronies would start knocking on their door with orders. He didn't tell Mary that. He didn't count it out loud. She had just gone through her awakening. She didn't need a business plan. She needed a bowl of porridge and some silence. Cale turned to Ivrain. She was standing in the doorway of the workshop, without her veil. Her silver eyes were fixed on the rose, on Mary, on the hammer. She said quietly that the rose was beautiful. Mary picked up the flower from the anvil. She held it out to Ivrain. Ivrain looked at the outstretched rose. She took it, pressed it to her chest. The petals tinkled. Mary smiled. She said that the first flower from her was the first. Well, someone had to be the first. Blue frame. Ivrain's blessing 22 increased to 23. That evening, Cale sat at the table and counted. 40 days until the mother's trial. Helmer had retreated but would rush toward his next trump card. Inquisitor Verrain had gone into hiding after the review, but hadn't disappeared. Somewhere behind them stood the Order of the Pure Flame, and above them all stood the king who had spoken 4 words. Cale looked at his family, his wife bearing the goddess's seal, a mute girl with a voice that can shatter seals, a blacksmith widow who speaks to metal, a healer who sees curses through obsidian glasses, a 12-year-old pickpocket, heiress to an ancient lineage, and him, a geneticist in the body of a blacksmith with 5,200 lineage points and 21,729 days of life. 6 of them, against the kingdom. That wasn't enough. But every day they grew stronger. Not in number, in power. Cale opened the system window and looked at the tree. The branches were growing. Slowly, but they were growing. On the 60th day, a woman with a sword came into the house. Cale heard a commotion in the night, Leah's scream, the clang of steel. He rolled off his cot and ran out into the yard. Moonlight. 3 shadows by the fence. Black cloaks, hoods, knives. One of the shadows was holding Leah by the collar. The girl was kicking and biting, but the knife at her throat made her freeze. The second shadow was heading toward the front door. The third stood guard. Cale didn't have time to take a step. A 4th figure leaped down from above, from the roof of the neighboring house, and landed between the shadow and the door. 2 strikes, a short sword. The first shadow fell with a slashed shoulder. The second let go of Leah and ran off. The third threw a knife. The figure dodged it. The knife embedded itself in the wall. The figure caught up to the third shadow in 4 strides and struck the back of her head with the hilt of the sword. The shadow fell. Silence. Leah sat on the ground, trembling. Cale ran up to her. He checked her throat. A scratch, not deep. There was blood, but it wasn't life-threatening. He looked up at the figure with the sword. A woman, tall, broad-shouldered, short dark hair, a scar across her left eyebrow, leather armor without crests, a sword in her right hand. Not a drop of sweat, not a single unnecessary movement. Cale activated genomic vision. Joanna Crest Reed, 26 years old, former captain of the Royal Guard, deserted after receiving an order to execute civilians in Kelmore province. Manhunt canceled after the statute of limitations expired. Current status, mercenary blade. Reputation, a blade that cannot be bought. Classified information, the order to execute civilians was given personally by King Hadrian IV. Joanna is a living witness against the crown. Current assignment, the assassination of Yvraine Moret. The client is anonymous. Payment received in advance. Cale read the last line, the assassination of Yvraine. He looked at the woman with the sword. She stood calmly, her sword lowered, not sheathed, but lowered. She was looking at Leah, at the scratch on her throat, at the way the girl was clinging to Cale. Cale asked why she had saved the child if she'd come to kill his wife. Joanna was silent for 5 seconds. Then she said the contract was for Yvraine, not for the girl. Cale said that wasn't an answer. Joanna sheathed her sword, slowly, deliberately. She said the 3 shadows weren't her people. They were from the Order of the Pure Flame. She'd been watching the house for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. She saw the Order send assassins and decided to intervene. Cale asked why. She said she didn't kill children. She said that was why she'd left the guard. Cale looked at her. The geneticist in him saw a target. The warrior in him saw the person who had just saved his daughter. The father in him made a decision before his mind had even finished thinking. He said he had a room. He said there was porridge in the kitchen. He said that if she didn't want to carry out the contract, she could stay. Joanna looked at him as if he were crazy. She said he was inviting into his home a mercenary who'd been sent to kill his wife. Cale said yes. Joanna said he was either a fool or saw something she didn't. Cale said he saw a person who jumped off a roof for the sake of someone else's child. The rest could be discussed over porridge. Joanna was silent. Then she took her hand off the hilt of her sword. She nodded. She went inside. Blue frame. Joanna's blessing. Starting value, 0. Cale looked at the 0. Not a minus, 0. That's already better than Celesta. In the morning, Cale examined the 3 attackers. 2 were dead. The 3rd was unconscious. Each had a tattoo on his neck, a small white flame. The Order of the Pure Flame. Cale woke the 3rd man. He interrogated him. The man was a soldier, a low-ranking mercenary. He knew little. He knew the order had come from above. He knew the target was Yvraine. He knew the house had to be burned down after the murder. He didn't know who had ordered it. He didn't know why. Cale let him go. Mary asked why. Cale said that a dead mercenary is evidence. A living mercenary is a message. He'll run back to his men and tell them that the Don house is protected, that the blacksmith has a blade, that 3 of them fell in a single night. Mary said he was thinking too far ahead. Cale said that was the only direction worth thinking in. Joanna sat in the kitchen eating porridge, silently, apart from everyone else. Leah was glancing at her from around the corner. So Young was drawing. Yvraine stood by the stove and didn't turn around. She knew why Joanna had come in the first place. Cale could tell by the look of her back, by the way she held her shoulders, high, tense. He walked up to her. He said quietly that Joanna wouldn't hurt her. Yvraine replied that she knew. She said she wasn't afraid of death. She was afraid that her death would kill the rest of them. Cale remained silent, because she was right. If Yvraine died, the seal would release energy. He could see it through the system, an uncontrolled release, a radius of 200 meters. Everyone in the house, Mary, Soyeon, Leah, Celeste, himself. Protecting Ivrain wasn't an act of nobility, it was survival. He told her that, straight out, no sugarcoating. He told her that if she died, everyone would die. That's why she would live. Not for herself, if she didn't want to, for them. Ivrain turned around, looked him in the eyes, silver against gray. She said she hated it when he was right. Blue frame. Ivrain's blessing 23 increased to 25. For the next 10 days, Joanna patrolled the neighborhood, silently, disciplined. She left at dawn, returned at dusk, ate alone, slept by the door. No one came near the house, not the order, not Helmer, not even the guards. Joanna's reputation acted as a wall. The blade that couldn't be bought now stood at the door of the blacksmith in Ashford. On the 70th day, Joanna sat down at the communal table for the first time, not by invitation. Leah snatched her plate from the separate table and placed it next to her own. She said that only cowards eat alone. Joanna looked at the 12-year-old pickpocket, at her plate, at the table where 6 people were seated. She sat down. She ate in silence, but at the communal table. Blue frame. Joanna's blessing has been raised from 0 to 8. The Order of the Pure Flame sent 3 assassins during the night. The mercenary Joanna Crest Reed, who had been hired to kill Ivrain, instead saved Leah and killed the attackers. Cale invited her to stay, and she agreed. The system showed that Joanna was a living witness against the king because the order to execute civilians had been given personally by Hadrian IV. There were 20 days left until the mother's trial. Cale sat in his workshop, staring at the system screen. Quest: the mother's trial. Condition: the spouse must be pregnant or present an heir to the lineage. The deadline is 90 days from the date of the union review. 20 days remaining. Ivrain was not pregnant. Cale had not touched her. The seal would not allow it, and he had not tried. Not because he was afraid, because Ivrain was not ready. Blessing 25 is trust, not intimacy. He opened the text of the law he had found in one of Ivrain's books. She read in 7 dead languages, but it turned out that one of them was the ancient legal code of Astron. Article 47. The paragraph on inheritance. Any person accepted by the head of the family as a son or daughter in the presence of 2 witnesses and with an entry in the parish register shall be recognized as an heir to the family. An adopted heir has equal rights with a blood heir regarding property, title, and the continuation of the family line. Cale read the paragraph 3 times. An adopted heir. Leah. She had been adopted. The documents are certified. 2 witnesses. The parish register. Everything is according to the law. By the letter of the law, Leah Don is the heir to the Don lineage, which means the mother's trial has been passed, not through pregnancy, through adoption. Cale smiled. Then he stopped, because it was too simple. The church won't accept this without a fight. Inquisitor Varane lost face at the review. He'll be looking for revenge, and the mother's trial is his chance. Cale began to prepare. First, the documents. He checked every piece of paper, the marriage certificate, in order, the adoption certificates, in order, the entry in the parish register, there, witness signatures, check. Second, witnesses. He needed people who could confirm that Leah lived in the house as a daughter, neighbors, the old man from across the street whose lock Cale had repaired during his first week, a merchant from the market, a guard from the barracks who brought swords in for sharpening. Cale visited them all in 2 days. Everyone agreed, not out of love for him, out of respect for his work. Third, Leah. Cale sat down with her that evening and explained that in 20 days she would have to stand before the court and call him father, publicly, in front of hundreds of people. Leah said she already called him dad. What difference does it make how many people hear it? Cale looked at her. 12 years old, a pickpocket from the harbor, the heiress to an ancient lineage she knew nothing about, and braver than any knight in this kingdom. Blue frame. Leah's blessing, 20 increased to 24. On the 75th day, what Cale had both been waiting for and fearing at the same time happened. Soyon began to sing. Not a note, not a sound, a song. It happened in the evening. Ivrain was reading aloud in a dead language, as she did every evening. Soyon sat beside her and listened. Ivrain finished the page. She fell silent, and Soyon began to sing, softly, a melody no one knew, words no one understood. Her voice was clear, high-pitched, ringing. The window panes trembled. The candle on the table flared brighter. The porridge in the pot stopped boiling. The whole house froze. Mary dropped her hammer. Celeste took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Leah sat with her mouth open. Joanna, standing by the door, placed her hand on her sword, not out of threat, but out of instinct. Ivrain. Ivrain sat next to Soyeon and wept, silently, without a sound. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she didn't wipe them away. She was listening. Soyeon sang for 30 seconds. Then she fell silent. She opened her eyes. She was startled. She covered her mouth with her hands. Ivrain hugged her. For the first time in her life, Ivrain Moray hugged another person. She held her close. Soyeon pressed herself against her and trembled. The blue frame exploded with text. Soyeon's blessing 22 increased to 34. Ivrain's blessing 25 increased to 30. Soyeon's talent, voice of seal breaking. Status, awakening initiated. Spontaneous activation. Cost, 0 clan points, 0 days of life. Condition, emotional bond with the seal bearer. Ivrain is the awakening trigger. Kale looked at the frame. A second spontaneous awakening, 0 cost. Soyeon didn't awaken because he activated the altar. She awakened because Ivrain had been reading books to her every night for 2 months straight. Because Ivrain stroked her head. Because Soyeon loved Ivrain, and the voice awoke to protect the one she loved. The tree did not grant this talent. The tree created the conditions: warmth, safety, affection. Soyeon did the rest herself. Kale closed the frame. He looked at Ivrain and Soyeon. They were sitting there, embracing each other. 2 orphans, one bearing the goddess's seal, the other with a voice capable of shattering that seal. They had found each other in his home, and the home had become what he had promised, a place where no one is born surplus. On the 85th day, Kale gathered everyone together, 7 people, in the kitchen of House 14. He said that in 5 days the mother's trial would take place. He said the plan was simple. Leah would step forward as the heir. The paperwork was in order. The law was on their side. He said the church would oppose it, that Varain would demand a child of his own blood, that there would be a scandal. But the law is the law. Mary said that if the law didn't work, she had a hammer. Kale said the hammer was Plan B. Leah said she liked Plan B better. Joanna said she'd stand by the exit and count how many people tried to stop them. Celeste said she'd prepare a medical report on Leah's health as the heiress, a complete one with a seal and a signature so that no bureaucrat could find fault with it. Ivrain was silent. Then she said one word. "Thank you." Quietly, almost a whisper, but everyone heard it. Blue frame, Ivrain's blessing. 30 increased to 33. Kale found Article 47 in an ancient legal code allowing the mother's trial to be passed through an adopted heir rather than through pregnancy. Soyeon sang a full song for the first time, and her talent, the voice of seal breaking, began to awaken spontaneously through her emotional connection with Ivrain. Kale gathered everyone and announced the plan for the trial in 5 days. The day of the mother's trial. The throne room. Packed. Even more packed than at the review. Rumors of the blacksmith who had humiliated the Inquisitor had spread throughout the capital, and now everyone wanted to see the second act. Kale stood at the entrance. Ivrain was beside him. Behind them was Leah. Behind Leah was Mary with a hammer strapped to her belt. Celeste carried a bag. Soyeon was next to Ivrain. Joanna brought up the rear. The 7 of them entered the throne room as one. King Hadrian sat on the throne. Standing next to him was a man Kale had never seen before. Tall, old, white hair down to his shoulders, a white robe with gold embroidery. On his chest was a symbol not of the Church of Light, but of something else. A pure white flame on a gold background. Kale activated his genomic vision. The sash around the old man's neck was 3-colored, gold, white, and black. Archbishop Tolmore. 71 years old, head of the Order of the Pure Flame, the second most powerful person in the kingdom after the king. the true target. The destruction of all bearers of the blood of the ancient gods. Responsible for the destruction of the House of Moray. Responsible for placing the seal on Selene 300 years ago. Maximum threat level. Cale clenched his teeth. Tolmor. The shadow that stood behind Varain, behind Helmer, behind the assassins in black cloaks. He had come in person. That meant the stakes had risen. Varain stood 3 steps behind Tolmor, pale, nervous, a pawn that had spotted the queen on the board and realized its true size. The trial had begun. Couples approached one after another. The husband represented his wife. The wife showed her belly or her baby. The church official took notes. An assembly line, just like at the review. Cale kept count. Number 847 was last again. When their turn came, the hall fell silent. Everyone was waiting. Varain stepped forward. His voice trembled, but his words were clear. He announced that, according to the law of the Church of Light, the trial required the wife to provide proof of fertility, either pregnancy or a born child. The absence of either meant the annulment of the marriage and the wife's return to the jurisdiction of the church. The jurisdiction of the church meant the stake. Cale nodded. He stepped forward. He spoke calmly in an even voice, just like at the review. He said that he respected the law of the church and that he respected the law of the kingdom, and that the law of the kingdom predates the law of the church by 300 years. He quoted Article 47 of the Craftsman's Code, the paragraph on inheritance. Any person accepted by the head of the clan in the presence of 2 witnesses and recorded in the parish register is recognized as the heir to the clan. He turned to Leah. Leah stepped forward. 12 years old, a clean dress that Ivrain had altered from one of her own old ones. Her hair was combed. The scrape on her cheek had healed. She stood up straight. Cale said that he was presenting his daughter to the court. Leah Dawn, accepted into the family, recorded in the parish register, confirmed by 2 witnesses. The heiress to the Dawn lineage under Article 47. He placed the documents on the table in front of the throne. The adoption certificate, an extract from the registry, Celesta's medical report, and the witnesses' signatures. The courtroom grew noisy. Varain flushed. He spoke quickly and loudly. He said that Article 47 did not apply to the trial of the mother, that the trial required biological offspring, that adoption was a ploy and an insult to the church. Cale had been expecting this. He turned to Varain and asked one thing. He asked where in the text of the law on the trial of the mother the word biological appeared. Varain fell silent. Cale pulled out a second document. The full text of the law on the mother's trial, written in ancient legal language, which Ivrain had spent 3 nights translating for him. He read the key phrase aloud. A wife is obligated to produce an heir to the lineage. An heir. Not a child. Not a biological offspring. An heir. The hall buzzed. Archbishop Tolmor, who until then had stood motionless, stirred for the first time. He turned his head. He looked at Cale. Through genomic vision, Cale saw the triple ribbon above Tolmor pulsing. The old man was thinking, calculating, deciding. Tolmor spoke. His voice was quiet, soft. The voice of a man who didn't need to shout to be heard. He said that Blacksmith Dawn was technically correct, that the law did not contain the word biological, that Article 47 allowed for inheritance by adoption, that the girl could be recognized as an heir. Varain turned to Tolmor with the expression of a man who'd been stabbed in the back. Tolmor continued. He said that, however, he said that the church reserves the right to monitor the Dawn family. He said there would be a re-examination in a year. He said that if by that time the family had not produced a blood heir, the matter would be raised again. Then he turned to Cale and looked him in the eye for the first time. He said 2 words. Interesting. Let him live. Cale stood there, feeling a chill run down his spine. Tolmor let them pass. Not because he'd lost, because he wanted to see what would happen next. A spider doesn't tear its web because of a single fly. It waits until the fly brings the rest. Blue frame. Quest, the Mother's Trial. Completed. Plus 3,000 clan points. Total 8,200. Enemy level increased. Archbishop Tolmore unlocked. They were leaving the palace. Leah was holding Kale's hand, tightly. Her palm was damp with sweat. She stood in front of the courtyard and didn't flinch, but now that the doors had closed, she was trembling. Kale squeezed her hand. He didn't say a word. She already knew. Halmer Crost was waiting for them on the palace steps, alone, without guards, without servants. He stood there, looking at them. His face was calm, unusually calm. He said he had lost. He said he wouldn't get the land of Moray. He said he accepted it. Then he said Kale should watch his back because Helmer was just a small-time loser. Those who stand above don't lose, they outmaneuver. He turned and walked away. Kale watched him go. Helmer Crost, his first enemy. A minor baron. He had just done something Kale hadn't expected. He had warned him, not threatened, warned. The blue frame showed no changes in his feed, but Kale remembered. An enemy who warns is more dangerous than one who shouts. For the next 3 months, Kale built a clan. Not an army, not a guild. A family. The first to come was the old man from the house across the street, the very same man whose castle Kale had repaired during his first week. His name was Born, a widower, 72 years old, a former watchmaker. His hands shook with age and he could no longer work. He lived on handouts. Kale offered him a place in the house, a room, food, and work he could manage. Born could teach So-yun and Liu to read and write. He could sort orders in the workshop. He could keep an eye on the house when everyone was gone. Born began to cry, silently. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. He nodded. Blue frame. Accepted into the clan. Born Geller. Starting blessing 8. Others came after Born. A widow with 3 children from the neighboring block. Her husband had died in the war. The children were starving. Kale took all 4 of them in. He gave them a room on the 2nd floor of House 12, which stood nearby and had been empty for 3 years. He repaired the roof in 2 days. The widow knew how to sew. Kale found her work through a merchant at the market. Then a 14-year-old boy arrived. He was a carpenter's apprentice who'd been fired by his boss for breaking an expensive tool. Kale took him on as an apprentice in his workshop. Then came 2 brothers, masons from the province of Kelmore, refugees, without papers, without a roof over their heads. Kale gave them a roof and work. They repaired the fence around house number 14 in a week. Then they began renovating house 12, then house 10. By the 100th day, the Dawn clan numbered 23 people, 3 houses on Grey Ash Street, a blacksmith's workshop, a sewing workshop, a carpenter's workshop, a steady income, a reputation. Through genomic vision, Kale saw the talents in each of them. Not everyone had recessive gifts. Most didn't have any. But everyone knew how to do something: sew, build, cook, count, or trade. Kale didn't awaken talents left and right. He awakened them only when a person was ready, when the blessing reached the threshold, when the soul spoke as we. A widow who was a seamstress turned out to be a master of fabric dyeing. Her hands could sense shades that others could not see. Kale awakened this gift on the 110th day when her blessing reached 25. The cost? 400 clan points and 1 day of life. Remaining, 21,728 days. The apprentice boy had a talent for working with wood. It wasn't just carpentry skill. He could sense the structure of the wood. He knew where it was alive and where it was dead. Awakening on the 120th day, 350 lineage points, 1 day, 21,727 days. Kale counted the days, his own days. Every awakening took a day away. Every talent awakened meant 24 hours he would not live. He thought about this every night, before falling asleep, in the silence, alone. And every time he came to the same conclusion. What's the point of a long life if it's empty? Better 58 years in which someone blossoms every day than 60 years in which you're alive but no one around you is truly living. Mary forged living metal every day. Her talent grew. Level 1 became Level 2. The maximum weight of a piece increased to 2 kilograms. The working time was up to 20 minutes. She forged a set of kitchen knives for House 14. Each knife was a work of art. The blades were thinner than paper. The handles were made of interwoven metal. They sold for 15 silver pieces each. Merchants from neighboring baronies began coming specifically for them. Soyeon sang every evening, quietly, for Ivrain, only for her. Her voice grew stronger. Words emerged, not human words, something ancient, a language no one knew. Ivrain knew it. She recognized the melodies from books written in dead languages. She told Kale that Soyeon was singing in the language of Selena, in the language of the goddess. Kale asked how Soyeon knew it. Ivrain said she didn't know. Maybe from the blood, maybe from the pain, maybe from that place where the voice had slept for 6 years. Celesta stopped wearing her glasses in public. Only around Kale, only when she needed to check a seal or look at a new member of the clan. Her blessing reached 28. She began calling Kale by his name, without irony, without quotation marks. Just Kale. Joanna stood guard, silently, precisely. On the 131st day, she called Kale my lord for the first time, without irony. Kale said he wasn't a lord. Joanna said that lord wasn't a title. A lord is someone you'd die for without a second thought. Blue frame. Joanna's blessing 8 raised to 16. On the 150th day, Kale stood in the courtyard of House 14 and looked out onto Grey Ash Street. 3 houses, 27 people, a blacksmith shop, a seamstress's shop, a carpenter's shop. Children were playing in the courtyard. Bourne was teaching Leah to read on a bench by the fence. Mary was forging in the workshop, and the clang of the hammer mingled with Soyeon's singing from an open second-floor window. Ivrain sat on the porch without her veil, reading a book. Celeste was checking the throat of one of the widow seamstress's children. Joanna was sharpening a sword by the gate. Kale watched it all and thought. The Dawn family. 6 months ago, he was an orphan from Ashford with a burn on his arm and nothing to his name. Now he was the head of a family of 27, with 3 workshops, with 5 awakened talents, with a wife whose seal was gradually weakening, with a daughter whose lineage stretched back through the ages, with a voice that could break any chain. Blue frame. Rod's stats, 11,400. Days remaining, 21,725. Ivrain's blessing, 33. Selena's seal has been reduced from 94% to 71%. The reduction occurred on its own, without a ritual, without intervention. Every day that Ivrain lived as a human rather than as a vessel of a curse took a fraction of a percent away from the seal. Care was eating away at the lock from the inside. On the 180th day, the order of the pure flame came for Ivrain. Not 3 assassins in the dead of night. 30 soldiers in broad daylight, with torches, with chains, with an order signed by Archbishop Talmor. Arrest, charged with heresy. The grounds, bearing the blood of an ancient goddess. The punishment, the stake. Immediate, without trial. Kale stood at the gate of House 14. Behind him stood 27 people. Mary with a hammer, Joanna with a sword. Bourne with a crutch. The seamstress widow with scissors. A young carpenter with an axe. The Mason brothers with their pickaxes. Leah with a stone in her hand. Every one of the 27 stood behind him, and not a single one left. Kale looked at the 30 soldiers, at the torches, at the chains. He activated genomic vision. The ribbons above the soldiers were gray. Ordinary people. Mercenaries. No talents, no faith. Money and orders. Among them stood Varain Ask. Behind him, in a closed carriage, sat Tolmor. Kale saw his ribbon through the carriage wall. A triple ribbon. Gold, white, black. The old man had come to watch Selena's last blood burn. Kale looked at the blue frame. Rod 11,400 glasses. Selena's seal 71%. Ivrain's blessing 33. So Yun's blessing 34. So Yun's talent. Voice of seal breaking. Level 1. Probability of successfully breaking the seal under current conditions 38%. 38. Not 50, not 70. 38. A 4 in 10 chance it'll work. A 6 in 10 chance it won't. And if it doesn't work, the seal will retaliate. With a backlash. With energy. An explosion. Everyone nearby will die. Kale closed his eyes. 3 seconds. Heart rate 130. Breathing ragged. His hands were shaking. He opened his eyes. He looked at Ivrain. She was standing behind him, without her veil. Silver eyes, ink-stained fingers. She was looking at the soldiers and the torches. She was looking at the bonfire they'd promised her 3 years ago. And for the first time, there was no humility on her face. There was anger. Quiet, deep. The anger of a woman who had found a reason to live and whom they had come to kill again. She turned to Kale. She said she wouldn't leave. She said that if they wanted to burn her, let them burn her right here. On her street. At her house. In front of her people. Kale said that no one was going to burn anyone. He turned to Varain. He spoke up, loudly, so the whole street could hear. He said that Tolmore's order was unlawful, that by decree of King Hadrian, the Dawn couple had been provisionally cleared pending a re-examination, that the re-examination was scheduled for a year from now, that a year hadn't passed, that an arrest before the review period had expired was a violation of the royal decree. Varain smirked. He said that the king's decree didn't apply to matters of faith. He said that the church stood above the crown in matters of heresy. He said that Tolmore had signed the order as archbishop, and no secular law could stop him. Kale nodded. He looked at Joanna. She was standing nearby, sword in hand. He quietly said one word to her. "Tell them." Joanna stepped forward. She raised her voice. She began to speak. Not about the church, not about Ivrain, about Kelmore, about the village in the province of Kelmore, where 3 years ago, the royal guard had been ordered to fire on civilians, about the 12 bodies, about the women and children, about the order given personally by Hadrian IV, about how she, Joanna Crest Reed, a former captain of the guard, had been present at the time and refused to carry it out, about how she deserted, about how she lived for 3 years as a mercenary carrying that secret, and about how Tolmore knew, because Tolmore was standing next to the king when he gave the order. Silence. Absolute silence. 30 soldiers stood with torches, not moving. Varain opened his mouth, then closed it. The carriage door swung open. Tolmore stepped out. White hair, a white robe, gold embroidery. He stood on Grey Ash Street and looked at Joanna, then at Kale, then at Ivrain. His face was calm, absolutely calm. He said that the former captain could say whatever he wanted, the word of a deserter against the word of the archbishop. Kale had been waiting for this. He turned to the crowd that had gathered behind the soldiers. Hundreds of people, neighbors, merchants, guards, onlookers, everyone who had heard Joanna. He said loudly, "Then let Tolmore swear by the name of the light that Kelmore was not there. Right now, in front of everyone. If he's telling the truth, the oath is worthless." Tolmore stood motionless. 5 seconds. 10. An oath in the name of the light was absolute in this world. To break it meant losing one's office. To swear falsely meant confessing to every believer that you were a traitor to the light. Tolmore couldn't swear because Kelmore was the truth. The crowd waited. The soldiers waited. Varain waited. Tolmore remained silent. And into that silence a voice spoke, not Kayla's, not Joanna's, not Tolmore's, So Yun's. She stepped out from behind Ivrain's back, small, 13 years old, black hair, narrow eyes. She opened her mouth and began to sing. Not a lullaby, not a melody, a single note, pure, high-pitched, silvery. The note struck the air like a hammer on an anvil. The torches in the soldiers' hands went out, all 30 at once. The flames simply vanished. The windows of House 14 began to vibrate. The ground beneath their feet trembled. And the seal on Yvraine responded. Kale saw through genomic vision as a silver ribbon around Yvraine flared up. Selena's 71% seal began to fall. 70, 65, 58, 49. Soyeon sang and the seal crumbled. Not slowly, not by the percentage, in chunks. The voice struck it like glass and the chains snapped one after another. Yvraine closed her eyes. A silvery glow enveloped her body. The veil she hadn't worn for a month would have been unnecessary. The light emanated from her skin, from her hair, from her eyes. She rose above the ground, 10 centimeters, 20, half a meter. The crowd recoiled. The soldiers dropped their extinguished torches. Yvraine fell to his knees. Tolmor stood and watched. For the first time, an expression appeared on his face. Fear. A blue frame. Selena's seal, 49%. 30, 20, 15, 10, 5. Soyeon sang. A single note, endless, pure. Leah held Soyeon's hand. Mary stood next to the hammer. Celeste took off her glasses and looked with bare eyes. Joanna dropped to one knee. For the first time in her life, not before the throne, before the light. Selena's seal, 5%. 3, 1, 0. Soyeon fell silent. Silence. Yvraine sank to the ground. The glow faded. She stood there, ordinary, 19 years old, pale skin, silver eyes, ink-stained fingers. She looked at her hands, then at Kale, then at Soyeon, then at Mary and Leah and Celeste and Joanna and Bourne, and all 27 people standing behind her. She opened her mouth and said one word, in her real voice, not the voice of Yvraine Murray, the voice of Selena, the voice of the goddess who had slept in chains for 300 years. She said, Kale. And that single word contained everything. 3 years of waiting for death, 9 corpses, the black veil, oversalted porridge, books in dead languages, a hand on a burn, the first night on the floor, the childhood name Rin, and the house on Grey Ash Street. The blue frame, Selena's seal removed, awakening complete. Yvraine Murray, true identity, reincarnation of the goddess Selena. Status, awakened. Memory restored. Power active. Yvraine's blessing 33 increased to 88. The Dawn clan has been recognized by history. Kale stood and looked at the number 88, then at Yvraine, at Rin, at Selena, at his wife, who was looking at him with silver eyes and smiling. For the first time in 3 years. A genuine smile. Not just the corner of her mouth, not a half smile, a full smile. And those silver eyes grew warm. Tolmor turned around, got into the carriage, drove away, without a word. The soldiers scattered. Yvraine lay face down on the ground, motionless. The crowd stood and watched. Then someone clapped. One person, then a second, then 10, then 100. Grey Ash Street rang with applause, and Kale stood in the midst of his clan, motionless. Because at that moment, the doors of a carriage at the other end of the street swung open. Another carriage, without coats of arms, without guards. A man stepped out of it, alone, unarmed, wearing a simple doublet. King Hadrian IV. He walked down Grey Ash Street through the parting crowd. He reached Kale. He stopped. He smiled, subtly, like a man who had just seen what he'd been searching for 15 years. He said, "Excellent work, blacksmith. Now go down to the dungeon. I have another bride for you."